Thank you very much. Look, I have this innate tendency to digress away from speeches. I actually loathe speeches, and I enjoy making speeches, don't get me wrong, but I loathe reading speeches. But when I do that, I do have a tendency to go off on tangents. So I'll try and keep the script, because I understand particularly this is a very, very good conference. I'd like to welcome all delegates. I know it's probably the end of the conference as far as you're concerned, but the challenges for all of us are never ending, and so it really is the beginning of yet another phase based upon the energy and expertise that has been exhibited today in terms of the delegates, the experience and the energy and the passion that you bring with you. And hopefully that collective of ideas will continue to go forward in terms of providing for more positive outcomes for Aboriginal people throughout Western Australia and Australia in a very general sense. So having said that, I will try and stick to script and go through a few areas for you which are pertinent to this particular conference. Certainly in terms of business enterprise and corporations, from what the conference is all about, that transcends all areas. It really does. It transcends all areas in terms of overcoming deficiencies that exist or gaps that exist with Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people. One of the best ways to achieve that is through economic fulfilment, and that transcends all areas and all portfolios in government. Duncan is right. I absolutely love the Indigenous Affairs portfolio. It is, like all of my portfolios, fairly complex and fairly challenging. When the Premier, I actually spat the chewy when I didn't get it in the first place, and then he got sick of me moaning, so he gave it to me after about 18 months in government. I was delighted that I was actually given the privilege of having Indigenous Affairs. He tried to take it off me when he gave me education about 8 months ago, but that didn't work. So I am delighted to keep it, and I like to think if all the cards go my way after March 9th next year, I'll keep it and we can finish off a bit of unfinished business. One of the things I found in government is that you find that you have these great aspirations of greatness and what you do want to achieve, and the wheels of progress in government are notoriously slow. I like to think when I was teaching politics for over 20 years, and when you used to teach the theory that things just happened when you were in government, and oh, how naive I was. Because of course there are another 16 other portfolio areas, or 16 other ministers with a plethora of other portfolio areas which make it difficult. Having said that, we have made significant inroads, I feel, particularly over the last 4 years, but we've got a way to go. And can I just start by referring back to the April 2002 COAG Commission regular report on key indicators of Aboriginal disadvantage. It sort of looks as a place in the sand in terms of the way forward, or ways in which we can have an objective informed decision-making process on the way forward, and that ascertain exactly what programs are achieving, because there's nothing worse in Indigenous affairs than finding programs that are just sort of sitting there as dust collectors or money which basically doesn't provide for positive economic outcomes and then provide tangible improvements in Aboriginal way of life. That was very significant to me when I first took over the portfolio, that we did have some, dare I say it, some method to the madness in terms of policy decisions that I did not want, and I told this to Patrick Walker when we first took over, I did not want to go and advocate for further programs for Aboriginal people that were duplicated in other areas or other levels of government. I did not want to go and waste political mileage advocating for millions of dollars for programs that already existed or had been duplicated in other areas. I said I wanted to have a look at programs that did exist. Let's have a look to ensure that we didn't have duplication, we didn't have a wastage of resources, but we had genuine, identifiable programs that did provide for positive outcomes. And that's what I'm sure you've heard today in terms of what is working throughout the community. And there has been some significant improvements in terms of positive outcomes for Aboriginal people over recent years. From an educational perspective, over recent years, there has been a noticeable improvement in NAPLAN testing for Aboriginal students in literacy and numeracy skills. Now that, can I tell you, as an educationalist, that is a very, very significant issue in terms of overcoming the gap between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. Until we do highlight those deficiencies and highlight strategies that can really provide for positive outcomes for literacy and numeracy areas within our schools, particularly in the rural and remote areas of Western Australia, we are going to have it much more difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult to provide real positive outcomes when students reach secondary level and move into either tertiary or training or the workforce. So I'm delighted to see there have been some improvements in that plan, but I've got to say we've still got a long way to go, and I'm preaching to the converted there. In terms of unemployment levels, health levels, housing, of course, there are some significant deficiencies. And again, in terms of providing positive economic an outlook for Aboriginal people, we can help to overcome those deficiencies. Now, if I can just go through a couple of things that we've done, certainly from a government perspective, this will not be a political speech, I can assure you. It is just what we're doing to try and, from a very, very altruistic, sincere attempt to try and do what we possibly can to ensure that we do provide positive outcomes for Aboriginal people. In December of 2009, we signed a Heads of Government agreement with the South West Aboriginal Land and Sea Council, aimed at resolving 6 Noongar native title claims over the southwest, including the Perth metropolitan area. It has been an ongoing process, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that process, but it has been very fruitful. The state has offered to provide a settlement package that will include the government's contribution to an investment trust, financial contribution to administration of a government structure, transferring land to the Noongar land estate, and the development of a metropolitan-based Noongar cultural interpretive centre. One of the aims of the negotiation is to determine any land within the southwest that could form a land base that would provide the Noongar people with the cultural, social and economic benefits, exactly what I'm talking about. But it actually empowers Noongar people and empowers the Aboriginal community to be part of the decision-making process. And we really have made a sincere attempt to try and get to that point to where we are at the moment. Indigenous land use agreements have been signed with the Yaru people, covering approximately 5,300 square kilometres of land in and around Broome. The state government is progressing key components of the agreement, including Yaru community receiving land valued at approximately $140 million for development, cultural and social welfare, as well as approximately $56 million for capacity building for the local Aboriginal community, preservation of cultural and heritage and economic development, social housing and joint management of proposed conservation estate. And again, this falls in very, very heavily falls into line with the message, the transparent message that we get when we go and we do talk with Aboriginal groups throughout the community. They do want that empowerment in terms of the decision-making process for economic development, and we like to think, I certainly like to think that we have been providing that. So these agreements that I've spoken about are negotiated with the purpose of resolving native title compensation issues and heritage issues affecting land requirements, future development, and providing financial security, and that's important. Financial security for the Noongar and Yaru communities. In another initiative, and this is something that I launched a few months ago, in September of this year I launched the Aboriginal Economic Participation Strategy for 2012-16. And look, you know, I understand the level of cynicism that may exist when you have these sorts of programs or strategies that are revealed. And to a lot of people, they are seen as nothing more than dust collectors. And it's simply not. This economic strategy, economic participation strategy, is exactly that. It does provide for tangible positive outcomes. It does identify areas of deficiency in terms of opportunities that are available for Aboriginal people, and ensures that we do provide open doors for providing new opportunities as a whole of government approach. Because one of the biggest issues that I've found always in with government, and certainly in my role, previous to my role as Indigenous Affairs Minister, but certainly as an educator for over 20 years and involvement in a number of community groups, and then in government, in opposition and in government, I found that very frequently there was a lot that was going on amongst government departments, etc., but very, very little in the way of a coordinated approach to ensure that the left hand knew what the right hand was doing. And that did provide some significant accelerated barriers that existed with regard to providing for positive outcomes. So the Aboriginal Affairs Coordinating Committee is leading the implementation of this strategy. The AACC, the uninitiated, is a group of government departments which works collectively, collaboratively and positively to provide for those outcomes. On the AACC comprises Directors General from the departments of DIA, of course, as the lead agency. Wonderful department it is. Education, Premier and Cabinet, Treasury, Child Protection, Housing, Regional Development and Lands, training and workforce development, health, corrective services, and WA police. So it's a very, very, dare I say it, high-level commitment on the part of government to ensure that all government departments are working in unison. And that's what it is. You do have an enormous amount of territorialism that exists in government. That government departments feel the necessity to put their plant on a particular project or area without actually coordinating that approach with other areas which have a reciprocal responsibility with regard to decision making. So we will be taking some significant steps with the AACC as a result of the economic participation strategy to ensure that we are much more proactive in a holistic sense to provide for these positive outcomes. So from a government perspective, and we do need to play a very significant role in this area, we will take proactive measures to increase levels of Aboriginal employment within the public sector and with contractors working on government contracts, which is an imperative. As a service provider, the government will take measures to support Aboriginal people and their communities in building the social and intellectual capital necessary to participate equally in the Western Australian economy. As a leader of the economy and as an outcome of the estate's economic development, the government will engage with the private sector to stimulate jobs and business opportunities for Aboriginal people. Again, it's an imperative to have those two arms of development working hand in hand. As a procurer of goods and services, the state will strengthen Aboriginal employment requirements in government procurement processes and increase the involvement of Aboriginal businesses in the delivery of government services and capital projects. So the state government's commitment to strengthening current government procurement processes in order to maximise government employment is also in recent endorsement of the exemption of the mandatory procurement procedure for Aboriginal enterprises, and that's a part of this process. So this will allow, I've got to say, state government entities to directly contract for the provision of goods and services with Aboriginal businesses for contracts of up to 150,000. So that's a very positive step forward in the procurement process. The exemption came into effect earlier this month, and it will provide increased opportunities for Aboriginal businesses to secure businesses and contracts with state government agencies. It also supports the sustainability and growth of Aboriginal businesses and increases Aboriginal employment. We are also working to encourage and assist the establishment and growth of Aboriginal business enterprises, and this will be achieved by brokering the formation of Aboriginal businesses, facilitating business networking and identifying opportunities for Aboriginal enterprise development. Now, there are a lot of words there, but as I said, if you do look at it in a generic sense, and I mean in a holistic generic sense as far as government is concerned, what it's referring to is the fact that government is working to ensure that the policy network across government is uniform, that you have that rich tapestry of energy that exists within government. You have a wealth of energy and expertise that exists within the government departments. They can work collectively with other government departments to provide for those positive outcomes. And you don't have this silo effect which has existed in the past. The silo effect is basically redundant in terms of the decision-making process for the West Australian government. The AACC will continue to work to ensure that those government departments are working cooperatively, as I said, and collaboratively and effectively to ensure that decisions are made for the betterment of Aboriginal people, not necessarily for individual projects or individual strategies that may work for a select group, but in a holistic approach to ensure that it does work in a collective approach. As I said, so that falls very, very neatly in terms of the economic participation strategy, and that then must, of course, work with the private sector. And can I just tell you, as Indigenous Affairs Minister, I've also, up until 6 months ago, been Training and Workforce Development Minister, and I continue to be Energy Minister. So I work very closely and cooperatively and effectively with the private sector, particularly in the mining and resources sector and the energy sector, which have very real interaction with Aboriginal people, particularly in the regions of Western Australia. And each and every time that they come into my office, they ask me if there's anything else, and I always talk about the fact that we need to work more cooperatively and collaboratively with government to ensure that we have positive outcomes for Aboriginal people. And on each and every occasion, unanimously, I've got to say, the response from those corporations or those groups or those mining companies or those in the energy sector, which is a very, very sectionally based sector, has been overwhelmingly positive. And there is an innate desire on the part of the private sector to work hand in hand with government to ensure that that unison of purpose does transcend into the private sector. That it is not, that government alone, not Nigel no friends. We can't do it alone. When you have that mentality, when you say it is left up to government to provide positive outcomes for Aboriginal people, you lose the plot. You simply can't do it. You must rely also on the intense, yet again, experience, expertise, generosity, and fortitude of the private sector to work with government. And again, it adds to that tapestry. So the silo effect is gone. And can I say, I'm speaking to people again here who are pretty much preaching to the converted, who understand that concept. So yes, you do have pockets of resistance around the community in terms of economic advancement for Aboriginal people. One of the biggest pockets of resistance that we do have, and I'm often a bit of a tangent here, but it's a pet of mine and I do need to say, one of the pockets of resistance we do have are perceptions that are created by a very biased media. And as Indigenous Affairs Minister, it really does, I'm often in despair in the fact that a lot of the media simply do not see the wood for the trees in terms of what is being done to ensure that we do overcome barriers for Aboriginal people, particularly with regard to economic participation. And as I say constantly to journalists, it would be really, really good if you could start perhaps providing some more positive stories, some more positive recollections, some more positive contributions in terms of what is being done out there in the real world for Aboriginal people. And so that you do actually provide some support mechanisms for the enormous amount of work that is being done through government, but also through the private sector. And yes, as I said, you will still have issues that exist and we still have enormous barriers to overcome. But economic participation will transcend into positive social outcomes for Aboriginal people. And as I say to the media, come along with us, guys. Don't be barriers for us, but come along on this journey because it is a really positive journey for us. Now, what I'd like to turn to is one area that pretty much epitomises exactly what I've been talking about with regard to economic participation, and that is with regard to employment opportunities for Aboriginal people. And as I've just articulated some roles through the economic participation strategy, coordinated through the AACC. And that is one aspect of that strategy. Now, a type example of that and how it actually works is through a program I initiated through my former Department of Training and Workforce Development, and that is the Training Together, Working Together project program. It actually won the Premier's Award for Public Sector Excellence 3 weeks ago, and I've got to say the only thing that disappointed me was I wasn't minister to accept the award because it was just terrific. It's a wonderful, wonderful program. And I'll just explain it to you and show how that builds so neatly into what I've just been talking about. I proudly stand as an advocate for Aboriginal people, as I keep on saying, I love working with Aboriginal people. I'm a Kalgoorlie boy. I grew up with the Wongai people. I have a deep affection for Wongai people, for Aboriginal people across Western Australia and the nation. And if I am judged on anything as a minister in the government, regardless of any of the portfolios, I like to think I'll be judged on providing some opportunities for Aboriginal people to provide positive outcomes for all Aboriginal people. And I think as far as Training Together, Working Together is concerned, we certainly have made good inroads. Now, what has been evident to me, certainly as an educator, was the fact that very frequently we were sending Aboriginal students out into the workforce with very limited literacy and numeracy skills and therefore very limited opportunities for employment. One of the ways we could do that, and as I said as Training Minister, was to ensure that we did improve training opportunities throughout our education system and then provide an avenue into the workplace for Aboriginal people from those training qualifications. And that's where we started Training Together, Working Together. And it is exactly what I've just been talking about in terms of ownership, participation in economic advancement through the AACC. Training Together, Working Together was a result of a series of forums that we went through the Training Together, Working Together Committee. Keith Spence as the chair of the State Training Board and Sue Gordon as the vice chair of State Training Board. We orchestrated a Training Together, Working Together committee. We went all over the state, interacted with Aboriginal elders, Aboriginal groups, local community groups, industry, government departments, and said, how can we provide for a more seamless transition from training into the workplace for Aboriginal people? And we came back, the results were pretty unanimous in each area. They wanted a one-stop shop for Aboriginal people. That is somewhere where Aboriginal people could go to provide information on job opportunities, on training opportunities, on such things as writing a CV, such things as getting a driver's licence, such things as what qualifications are required for a job, such things as providing a connection between the individuals and the workplace, and then transferring through. So we needed a one-stop shop. One of the other things that was required was some mentoring, a comprehensive mentoring strategy, so that we didn't say, thank you, that's it, and wave the individuals goodbye as we told them where the job was, but we mentored those individuals through into the workplace to ensure that they not only were able to access a job, but they were actually able to retain that job opportunity. That's very, very important. And one of the other areas that came through training together, working together, was the need for role models. And yes, we do need to have high-profile sports people, because they provide a very powerful weapon to a lot of Aboriginal people, but we needed people that were successful in life, Aboriginal people successful in life, and there are thousands of them. And we needed to make sure that we sent that message to Aboriginal people, see what you can achieve. So as a result of that, we now have 5 dedicated Aboriginal workforce development centres in Western Australia. The main centre is in Murray Street in Perth, and if you haven't been there, I say give yourself a treat one day, go and have a look at it. It is sensational. It is a magnificent operating body, which when I finished, there were 12 FTEs there, 9 of them are Aboriginal people. They work with thousands of Aboriginal people to provide job opportunities for them and to assist them into that workplace. There is also one in Broome, there is one in Geraldton, there is one in Kalgoorlie, and there is one in Bunbury. Ideally, there will be 3 more rolled out in the next term of government, but they are working very effectively. We've also rolled out a comprehensive mentoring strategy, not a reinvention of the wheel, but a mentoring strategy that draws on the energy and the expertise of existing programs like SMILE, the SMILE group in the south of the state in Kwinana, Coburn area. Like Dave Burapunda's got a great mentoring program there with his foundation. Same with the Polypharma Foundation, same with Clontarf. There are a number of different organisations that currently exist and provide mentoring. Why on earth would we as government spend millions of dollars providing another mentoring system when they already exist? So that's what we've got in that mentoring. We also now have 42 role models that go throughout around Western Australia, assisting Aboriginal people, providing stimulus through forums, saying see what you can achieve if you put your mind to it. So that is a perfect type example of how you can work when you have a holistic approach to and collaborative approach to economic participation. We've now got a situation where young Aboriginal students are coming out with Cert 2, Cert 3s. I'm telling you now, there's nothing better than going to a graduation ceremony with 80 Cert 2 qualifications down at SMILE or 130 at Dave's Foundation or whatever it might be, and watching those big broad smiles come out because they've got a qualification. So then we're going to assist those students and mature age students into the workplace. So as I said, training together, working together does empower the community. Aboriginal people were part of that decision making in terms of what was needed, and it's providing positive outcomes. As I said, because certainly in terms of unemployment levels, we've still got a long way to go, but I think those sorts of programs certainly assist. In terms of education, I love that portfolio. You know, it's just a great portfolio, and again, it gives me a wonderful opportunity to make some tangible improvements in terms of providing for Aboriginal people. I told Sharon the first day I saw her, I said, mate, you need to understand a couple of issues, but number one on the agenda is I would like to see some improvements in the delivery of literacy and numeracy delivery for Aboriginal students. And that is number one on the agenda, and she's well aware of that. The current Aboriginal Education Plan of 2011-14 provides a framework for guiding our efforts, or the department's efforts, in Aboriginal education, and it does align with the goals and targets of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Action Plan of 2010-14. So our department actively supports the development of formal partnerships between schools and their local Aboriginal communities, and that is absolutely vital. And as Duncan would be aware, I gave out the awards for the PALS program last week, which is this tremendous program which interacts with schools whereby Aboriginal people, Aboriginal students and non-Aboriginal students work together, developing an awareness of Aboriginal culture within the classroom. And when the students come along and get their awards and you see them working hand by hand, it is really, really hard. You want everyone to get a tear in your eye when you see something like an award you go back, because it's fantastic. So that PALS program is but one example. But so far there are partnerships that exist throughout our education system, and they're being finalised in 49 public schools in terms of those partnerships, which again is a positive step forward. Another successful program that's been implemented in WA is the Follow the Dream program, that is Partnerships for Success. You may have heard of it. This program provides after-school tuition and mentoring support to high-achieving Aboriginal students in years 8 to 12. So again, it's a recognition of achievement and a recognition of what can be achieved, okay, in terms of the future. The Follow the Dream program assists Aboriginal high school students to continue excelling academically, and the outcomes consistently show improved attendance, accelerated learning outcomes and increased retention rates. And as I said, those retention rate issues are the ones that really start to kick in at the secondary level. Because what happens, of course, is particularly at primary school level in a lot of our rural and remote areas, retention is a very, very difficult concept. So by the time students get to secondary school, as I've said, literacy and numeracy levels are precariously low. And I mean precariously because that will make the difference between a student being retained at secondary level of education or leaving secondary level of education and moving on. So what it does, of course, when you do improve literacy and numeracy skills, it has a tangible impact in terms of providing much more for self-esteem, for resiliency skills for those Aboriginal students when they move to year 8, 9 and 10, when the academic challenges become much more profound. So the Follow the Dream program currently operates at 25 host school sites. Of these sites, 12 are co-managed and co-funded with the Graham Polly Farmer Foundation, who broker private industry support and funding for the program. So as I said, again with education, we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel, we are actually working hand in hand with existing programs. The High Achievers project, which commenced in 2008, is another innovative project designed to maintain engagement and achievement of high-performing Aboriginal students across the primary years. It supports accelerated science and literacy outcomes for Aboriginal students. And the number of schools in Western Australia participating in the project increased to 17 in 2012, there were 14 in 2011. This number is expected to increase again in 2013. So as I said, there are a number of programs that exist, and one of the best, and I'll conclude on this, one of the most, dare I say it, I would suggest one of the most innovative, but also one of the most effective projects that exists is the Aboriginal Kindergarten program. We now have 28 specialist Aboriginal kindergartens throughout Western Australia. Again, if you really want to see what's going on and have see some good results of good positive outcomes, go and have a look at some of these kindergartens. I've been to about half a dozen now. And what they do is these students will be picked up from home, they'll get breakfast, they will in a number of instances have their clothes cleaned, they will have specialist attention in terms of direct education interaction, and then they'll be taken home. And it is very, very good in sending a very strong message, not just to the students, but their parents, because their parents get involved as well. It empowers the parents to be part of that process. And that's, as I said, when you put that message there, you put that seed of achievement there with those students, with those parents, it then transfers through into the primary level of education and then into the secondary level of education. And then in terms of economic participation, we are really in the ballpark. We are really in a situation there where we can provide positive outcomes. And that again gets back to the whole issue there of government working together, departments working together, Aboriginal people working with the non-Aboriginal community to ensure that we do overcome those significant barriers that still exist within our community. So I hope that gives you a bit of an outline in terms of what we've done as a government, what we're doing as a government, and as a community as a whole. And as I said when I started, I really enjoy being Minister for Indigenous Affairs, and I really like to think I will still be here after March next year to continue to work with you to provide provide positive outcomes for Aboriginal Australians. Thank you very much.